Last time when I showed you the fabrics that I bought, there were some questions that were raised both here on the channel as well as in person and also on other social media. So I thought we'd just go over some frequently asked questions about how to use these fabrics. Let's get started. Okay, so let's go over some frequently asked questions that we have about African fabric. So question 1, what are African fabrics? African fabrics are textiles that come from the various countries in the continent of Africa. Common types of African fabric are Ankara, which is what we're focusing on in our video today, as well as kente, mudcloth, and shwe shwe. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that one right. So what is Ankara fabric? Ankara fabric, also known as African wax print, is a cotton fabric with vibrant patterns that are created by using a wax resist block printing technique. It's popular for its durability and striking designs. They have vibrant colors, bold prints, and cultural significance. So what I've found, most of these, they have geometric designs. We've seen floral designs, and we've seen symbolic designs that represent particular cultures or particular stories. African fabrics often carry cultural meanings with specific patterns and colors representing a particular tribe, their stories, or their traditions. Because of the history of the fabric, the designs are also likely to have Dutch, Indonesian, and other influences as well. How do I care for African fabrics? I wash Ankara fabric the same way as I wash all of my fabric in the washing machine with cold water using a mild detergent. I avoid using bleach. It helps to opt for air drying instead of using the dryer, but generally speaking, I do put the fabric in the dryer using a low setting. But air drying would help preserve the quality of the fabric as well as the colors. Some people do like to wash the fabric in hot water to wash out the wax. Do the fabrics bleed? No, I've never found that they bleed. Because of the wax, the colors are pretty much secured inside the fabric itself, so I've never encountered any bleeding. If you're worried about that, certainly you can pre-wash them, and especially if you're thinking about like the last color that was put in there that hasn't been waxed, maybe that one might bleed, but I really haven't seen that happen to me. I decided to go ahead and test one of the fabrics here. I chose the red and white one because the red is more likely to bleed and the white will actually help show the bleeding pretty well. I used some hot water straight from the coffee pot. So I just let it sit here for a little bit. And then just let it dry. Okay, so there you have it. The fabric itself is still red and white. There's no bleeding that I can see in here. And also the paper towel is also clear. But the bowl does have a lot of pink in it. So I would recommend that you not wash this kind of fabric with other lighter colored fabrics. And that when you do wash these fabrics that you add a color catcher in the wash. Or with vinegar to set the colors before using them in your quilt. The best way to see if a fabric is going to bleed is just to test it out. So here's the wash fabric and here's the unwashed fabric so you can compare them. Yeah, you can see that the red in the wash fabric is just as vibrant as the red in the unwashed fabric. Will the colors fade? I think so. I think the wax will probably protect it for a while, but if you've had the quilt for a while, if you've had it in a hot environment, if you put it in the dryer, if you've put it out in the sun, over time probably the wax will wear away. So with use of the quilt, so it is possible that it would start fading. So I would just treat this fabric the way I would treat any of my other quilts, is make sure that I rotate them and keep them out of direct sunlight. How do I store African fabrics? I store them in the same way as I store my other fabrics. Put them in a cool, dry place. You need to be especially careful not to put them in a warm place just because there's wax on them. And you do want to put them away from direct sunlight to avoid fading. I think these have less of a chance of fading than other fabric, but there's still possibility, so I would still keep them away from direct sunlight. and you can just fold them neatly, or you can roll them to avoid creases. Just like you want to avoid stacking quilts because your fold may become weak, you also want to be careful about stacking big heavy layers of fabric. And so my favorite way to store all fabric, and including African fabric, is to wrap them around a magazine board like this. The magazine board in the inside provides that structural integrity, and then you can place them vertically like you would a book with all the other rows of fabric. This makes it a lot easier to find your fabric that you're looking for, and also keeps the fabric from getting the weight of all the other fabrics on top of each other. It also helps you prevent a mess when you're trying to take out one fabric. You can just take out this one without having to worry about your whole stack toppling over. Can African fabrics be used for quilting? Absolutely. That's what I use them for, and I really enjoy doing that. The body of the fabric, because of the wax, makes it a little bit stiffer, so it actually makes it like it's been starched. Like some people starch their fabric to make it a little stiffer, to make it easy to manipulate when you're cutting and sewing. So this fabric has that body in it, and it's really a joy to cut and to sew with. I haven't had any trouble with using layers, like with the binding, for example, but I guess it would depend on the fabric itself. So this fabric is made by a lot of different manufacturers, and there probably isn't as much standardization as there is in the fabrics that we get on the boat, for example. And so there are a couple of things that I do to use this fabric. So one thing you have to keep in mind is that this fabric doesn't look to me like it's been put on bolts and stored that way, because of the way they're folded and some of the wrinkles that we found in the fabric when we were looking at it earlier. So I would make sure that I properly press them first so that they're all straight. And because of the design, because they're going every which way, so you would have to be really careful about making sure that you have a good straight cut when you're cutting them. So the other thing is, because they were made in factories and they don't have as much standardization, some of the fabrics have different amounts of wax on them, and some of them have a different thread count. They feel different. Some of them are more coarse than others are. Some of them are more soft. None of these actually are soft like a batik fabric is. I think batiks have a thinner weave cotton, and they also have a higher thread count. To me, this Ankara fabric has a lower thread count. So if you are used to buying fabric from a quilt store and don't like the quality of, say, a box store, you may not be happy with the quality of this fabric. It's 100% secure. To me, I have no worries about using it in quilts or using it for carrying heavy things, for example, like in a bag. So it's a good quality fabric. But if you only use quilt shop fabric and are not familiar with other weaves, then you may not necessarily be happy with this fabric. It's kind of hard to explain the feel of this. If you think maybe homespun fabric, if you think, so it's a looser weave, like maybe a homespun, maybe it's a little tighter than homespun. I'm that familiar with homespun, but it also could be some of them are like a thin canvas, so they have a body to them, they have thicker threads, so it's like a thin canvas, so it's still thin. It's very usable as a quilt fabric, but it is a different feel to it. And if you are worried about the quality, you may want to choose particular manufacturers that you like, or you may want to buy them in a physical setting so that you can actually feel them for yourself, what you want to use for your quilt. Because even amongst all the fabric that I bought here, the fabric does feel different from each other. It's not all the same. They're all high enough quality to use, but I do use box store fabric, so I'm not very particular in that way. Where can I buy African fabrics? I will put a link in the description box for the place where I bought the fabric and a couple other places where I have bought other fabric. You may be able to find some stores that sell them. Also, here in Columbus, there are some flea markets that have stalls that sell this kind of fabric. Can I find African fabric in pre-cut bundles? I haven't personally seen them, but I do know that they do exist. And according to Google, retailers do offer fabric bundles of African fabric. And fat quarters, jelly rolls, and charm packs. But I personally have never seen them. Are African fabrics expensive? Well, it depends on the quality and where you buy them from. My guess is that if you buy fabric that is manufactured in the Netherlands, it would be more expensive, and fabric manufactured in Africa would be less expensive. The price is generally affordable. It's I've seen it about $4.99 a yard pretty much. It would depend on the technique used to print the design and also the complexity of the design. It also depends on where you buy them, fabrics, whether you buy them online or whether you buy them from a specialized quilt store, or if you buy them from a local fabric shop that carries international textiles. Depending on where you bought it, how much markup there is. It's going to depend on the type and quality of the fabric, that the underlying fabric that's being used on here. But generally they can range from pretty affordable to high end. My name is Shelina. This channel, Quilt and Color, is a variety show all about quilting. Please subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any of the videos. How do I incorporate African fabrics into my quilt designs? Because of the bold patterns that they have, I think they would work wonderfully as a feature of the quilt, to use them as whole as you can possibly make them. You can use African fabrics as a focal point of your quilt. So if, say, in the center of your medallion, or if you use them in the large blocks, you can make them maybe, say, in the middle of a star, or if you use them, say, on the border, where you can showcase the design of the fabric itself. Most of these designs are pretty big, so they probably aren't very good for cutting them into small pieces, because you're going to wind up with a lot of different colors. And if you want more cohesive look to the quilt, you may not get that if you're cutting these up into small pieces. Another ways I've used them is to fussy cut particular sections of the fabric to make it look the way I want it to look. You can also pair them with neutral fabric or solid fabric to accentuate this fabric without clashing with other fabrics that are there. I think that, to me, is the biggest issue with using these fabrics, is that you may wind up with them competing with each other for attention, and pairing them, say, with a neutral color maybe will help calm it down a little bit, or a solid color may help. I found, actually, for my CD quilt, the one where I use a CD for the template for the circles, I actually found that a busier background, it's a neutral background, but it's a little busier than the solid. It kept the fabric from competing with each other for attention, and the neutral background let each of the fabrics shine. I personally wouldn't just mix and match any old fabric unless that was my plan, is to make, like a scrap quilt that really mixes and matches everything. But as a general, I like to have my quilts to have some kind of cohesiveness to it. So I will use fabric that I think will coordinate with each other. So especially for African fabrics, I spend a lot of time auditioning fabrics to see what will work together and make sure that the colors and the prints and everything will not clash with each other. I would use more negative space in order to provide a cohesiveness to the quilt without overloading the quilt. Can I mix African fabrics with other fabric? Yes, I do that all the time. Sometimes you do need a neutral fabric, and to me, it's easier to just get a neutral from my stash rather than trying to find an African fabric that's neutral. Also, solids help provide that background. If you mix fabrics, I recommend that you pre-wash so that they all shrink at the same rate once it's in the quilt. How do I handle the bold patterns of African fabrics in quilting? You have to let your fabric guide your design. You have to pretty much let the design on the fabric, choose a design of your quilt. A simple quilt pattern will work better for a complex fabric pattern. Are African fabrics suitable for beginners? Oh, definitely they are. The texture of them makes them easy to piece and cut. As I talked about before with the body of the fabric, they're pretty easy to cut and to piece. African fabric can be used for all skill levels. And their bold patterns can be forgiving. You can use a simple quilt pattern and let the fabric do all of the work for you in creating a striking quilt. And it is also pretty forgiving because the patterns go every which way, because there is not necessarily a really line to them. Mixing and matching them also gives you that forgiveness, because you can continue with that way. These would work well for improv quilts as well. because there isn't a particular way that they should go. You can put them whichever way you want to. Can I use African fabrics in other sewing projects? Absolutely. I think these will make wonderful curtains. They would make good tablecloths. They would make good bedspreads. They would be wonderful using them in the back of a quilt to make them whole, a duvet cover, pillows. You can use them in any way that you use other cotton fabric. What is the best way to cut African fabric for quilting? Using the traditional supplies that quilters have, a rotary cutter with a sharp blade, a cutting mat, and a ruler is probably the best way to cut them, but you can also use scissors is fine. One thing that you do need to take into consideration when using this fabric for quilts is the directional of fabric. Some of these designs, they are going directional in different ways. Normally when you're making a quilt, you have to take into consideration the direction of the fabric, and when you're doing that, especially with fabric like this, your direction may keep changing, and so you would have to make sure that you're aware of the direction that it's going to work the way you want it to in the quilt. And so you want to consider the pattern of the fabric to ensure the design integrity of your quilt pattern. I hope these answers help you with your quilting project, and if I miss anything, please be sure to ask me in the comment box below. I did want to make an announcement. In December, I hosted a 15 minutes to stitch challenge, and people really enjoyed that, and I enjoyed it, and a lot of people had asked for it to come back, and so we will resume that 15 minutes to stitch challenge. I will post daily videos and ask you to sew along with me and sew for 15 minutes, and I hope that you'll join me for that challenge. Make sure that you subscribe so you don't miss that. I want to thank everyone for all of your wonderful comments. In my last video, Controversy about African Fabrics, I learned so much. Thank you for watching. I appreciate all of your support, and I'll see you in the next video.